Let me tell you something they never put in the parenting books. They tell you about the sleepless nights, the first steps, the scraped knees you'll bandage with shaking hands. What they don't tell you is that one day, those same hands you taught to hold a hammer will be the ones that shove you down a flight of stairs, and the floor you built with your own two hands will be the one catching your blood. Welcome back to the channel. Get comfortable, grab something warm, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to do the right thing. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, and make sure you subscribe. You're going to want to stay for this one. My name is Harold Dawson. Harry to the people who actually matter. And trust me, by the time this story is over, you're going to understand exactly why that list got very, very short. I am 69 years old. I have spent 38 of those years building things. Houses, porches, decks, offices, restaurants, churches. If it had walls and a roof and someone's dream attached to it, chances are these hands touched it at some point. Dawson Built Construction. That was the name on the truck, the business cards, the signs outside job sites from Savannah to Hilton Head. I started that company with nothing but a borrowed toolbox, my father's old pickup truck that burned oil like it was trying to set some kind of record, and the kind of stubborn faith that only makes sense when you're 23 years old and too dumb to know what failure looks like. By the time I was 55, Dawson Built had 11 trucks, 26 employees, and a reputation that meant something in Chatham County. People didn't just hire me to build their houses. They hired me because when Harry Dawson built something, it stayed built. Now, I need you to picture my house. A Victorian on Abercorn Street in Savannah, Georgia. Not one of the fancy painted ones, the tourist's photograph. Mine was the one that had been left for dead in 1989. Boarded windows, collapsed porch, roof that looked like God had taken a bite out of it and decided he didn't like the taste. I bought it for next to nothing and spent 2 years bringing it back to life with my own hands. Every floorboard, every staircase railing, every crown molding. I carved the front door myself from a piece of reclaimed cypress I'd pulled out of a barn in Effingham County. That house wasn't just where I lived. It was the best thing I ever built. Well, the second best thing. The best thing I ever built was a life with Margaret Dawson. Maggie. Lord, where do I even start with Maggie? She was a kindergarten teacher with a laugh that could fill a cathedral and a temper that could empty one just as fast. She had this way of looking at me when I came home, covered in sawdust and sweat, like I was the most ridiculous and wonderful thing she had ever seen. 31 years that woman stood beside me, through the years when we ate rice and beans 3 nights a week, because every dollar went back into the company, through the years when the phone finally started ringing so much we couldn't keep up. Through all of it, she had one dream that I never got around to fulfilling. A cottage, a little place out by the marshes, where the Savannah River spreads out and the egrets stand in the shallow water at sunset like they're posing for a painting nobody asked for. Nothing grand, just a porch with 2 rocking chairs and a view that went on forever. Harry, she used to say, leaning against me on our back porch, watching the evening settle over Abercorn Street. One day, you're going to build me that little house by the water. And we're going to sit there and do absolutely nothing for the rest of our lives. One day. That was always the plan. One day. Then one day became no day. 8 years ago, Maggie had a stroke. The first one was a warning. The second one, 6 months later, was not. I spent 2 years taking care of her. 2 years of hospital beds and medication schedules, and learning how to do things for the woman who had spent 31 years doing everything for me. I fed her. I bathed her. I sat beside her bed at 3 in the morning and held her hand and talked to her about the cottage by the marsh, about the rocking chairs, about the egrets. I don't know if she could hear me by the end. I talked anyway, because that's what you do when you love someone. You keep talking even when the room goes quiet. She passed on a Tuesday in April, quietly, like she was just stepping out for a moment and forgot to come back. After the funeral, After the casseroles stopped coming and the sympathy cards stopped arriving and the house got so quiet that the creaking of the floors sounded like conversations I couldn't quite make out, I went down to my workshop, the basement, my place, the one room in that Victorian that was entirely mine. Workbenches I'd built myself. Tools hanging on pegboard walls in the exact order I wanted them. The smell of sawdust and linseed oil, and decades of honest work soaked into every surface. I sat down at my drafting table. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and I started drawing. The cottage, Maggie's cottage. The little house by the marsh, with 2 rocking chairs, and a view that went on forever. I didn't tell anyone. Not a soul. I just drew. Every night, after the house went dark and the only sound was the oak trees brushing against the windows, I went down to that workshop and I worked on those plans. Room by room, board by board. I designed it the way I had built everything in my life, slowly, carefully, with my hands and my whole heart. 8 years now. 8 years of nights in that workshop. The plans are finished. Every measurement, every joint, every single nail accounted for. The most complete, most beautiful thing I have ever designed. And I never built it, because the only person I wanted to build it for was gone, and building it alone would have meant admitting that. But I kept the plans. Rolled up tight in a leather tube, leaning against the wall in my workshop, right next to the drafting table. Waiting. I didn't know what they were waiting for. Not yet. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up bleeding on that workshop floor with sawdust sticking to the side of my face and the taste of copper in my mouth, you need to understand the boy I raised. And the woman he brought into my house. Because that is where this whole thing started to come apart. And trust me, it came apart in ways I never saw coming. Not from a man who has spent his entire life reading blueprints. There are 2 kinds of people who show up at your hospital bed with flowers. The ones who are worried about you, and the ones who are worried about what happens to your things if you don't wake up. It took me an embarrassingly long time to figure out which kind my son was. Craig Dawson, 47 years old, my only child. Craig never wanted to be a carpenter. Never wanted to touch the business. Never wanted to learn the difference between red oak and white oak, which would have been fine. A man has every right to choose his own path. What bothered me was that Craig didn't just reject the craft. He resented it. He resented the sawdust on my clothes, the phone calls at dinner, the way people would stop me in the street and say, "Harry Dawson, you built my house." He once told me, at 25, with enough whiskey in him to say what he actually meant. "Do you know what it's like being the son of the greatest carpenter in Savannah, who can't even hang a shelf straight?" I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't. He drifted through jobs, sales, insurance. A brief stint in real estate that produced more business cards than actual business. And then he met Jolene. Jolene Fitch of Valdosta, Georgia. Former real estate agent with a smile that arrived before she did and stayed long after you wished it hadn't. She had this voice, sweet tea and magnolias on the surface, but underneath it something that clanked like a chain being dragged across a hardwood floor. "Harry, you look so tired," she would say, stretching the word tired like taffy until it sounded less like concern and more like an observation about my expiration date. "Harry, should you really be using power tools at your age?" At my age. I had been using power tools since before her parents had their first date. But I smiled, because at that point, I still believed family was family. I was going to need a serious correction on that belief. About 2 years ago, I broke my hip at an old job site. The doctor used words like rest and recovery, and maybe it's time to slow down. And Craig showed up at the hospital with flowers. Nice flowers. Not gas station flowers. The kind that told me either he was genuinely concerned or he had something to ask. "Dad," he said with that wide-eyed expression I now recognize as rehearsed sincerity. "Jolene and I want to move in, help around the house, take care of you." I looked at him, my son, my blood. "You sure?" I asked. "Dad, you're all I've got." Hook, line, and sinker, Harry. They moved in on a Saturday. Craig, Jolene, and their daughter Lily. I need to stop here and tell you about Lily, because Lily is the reason this story doesn't end in the dark. Lily Dawson, 14 years old. Quiet the way deep water is quiet. Not because nothing is happening, but because everything happening is below the surface. She had her grandmother's hands. I noticed it the first week. The way her fingers moved when she picked things up, deliberate, careful, like she was already measuring the weight of everything she touched. The first time she came down to my workshop, she stood in the doorway for a full minute, just looking. The workbenches, the tools on the pegboard, the smell of sawdust and linseed oil soaked into those walls over 30 years. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Lily girl," I said. "This is the one room in this house where you never have to ask." She started coming every afternoon. She learned to use a hand plane, to read a blueprint, to tell a dovetail joint from a mortise and tenon. One evening, she was sanding a jewelry box for a school project, and she looked up with sawdust in her hair and said, "Grandpa, your hands tell better stories than your mouth." I laughed so hard my hip ached. "That's because my hands have made fewer mistakes," I told her. She grinned. Lord, that kid had Maggie's grin. But here is the thing about lights. Sometimes they are the only thing showing you how dark everything else has gotten. Year 2 is when the temperature changed. Craig started dropping comments into conversations like coins into a fountain. "Dad, some of your methods are a little outdated. Dad, the company needs fresh eyes. Dad, why not let someone else carry the weight?" Someone else. He meant himself. And Jolene was always nearby, never speaking, just positioned, like a chess piece waiting for the board to catch up. But the comments were nothing compared to what Jolene was doing behind my back. She started screening my calls. When Russell Briggs, my neighbor, came by to check on me, Jolene met him at the door and said, "Harry's resting. He's not up for visitors." When my old friend Earl from the hardware store called, she told him I was having one of his confused days. Confused days. This woman was telling people I was losing my mind, and she was doing it so sweetly that people believed her. Then came the dinner. Pot roast that Jolene had made with the enthusiasm of someone completing a homework assignment. Craig cleared his throat, and I knew the way you know a storm is coming before the first drop falls. "Dad," he started, "Jolene and I have been thinking. You deserve to rest. What if you signed over power of attorney to me? The house, the business, the accounts. I'd handle everything." The table went quiet. Lily stopped chewing. She looked at me, then at her father, then back at me, and something in her young eyes told me she understood more than anyone gave her credit for. I put my fork down. I looked at Craig. I looked at Jolene, who was studying her pot roast like it contained the answers to questions nobody had asked. "Let me think about it," I said. I had already thought about it. The answer was no. No today. No tomorrow. No until the oak trees on Abercorn Street turned to dust. That quiet, undramatic, perfectly reasonable no was apparently the match that lit the fuse. Because after that dinner, things didn't just get cold in my house. They got dangerous. And I, the man who had spent 38 years building structures designed to stand, realized someone was trying to demolish mine from the inside. I just didn't move fast enough to stop what came next. I have spent my entire life reading blueprints. Lines, measurements, load-bearing walls, the invisible structure that holds everything up. So believe me when I tell you, I know what it looks like when someone is quietly trying to tear a structure down from the inside. After that dinner, the house on Abercorn Street became a crime scene in slow motion. Jolene stopped cooking on weekends. Craig started spending evenings in my home office. On phone calls he would end the moment I walked past the door. Conversations got shorter. Smiles got thinner. The air in that house had the kind of tension you feel in wood right before it splits. And I started paying attention. Documents moved on my desk. Not dramatically, not obviously, just slightly out of place, the way only someone who keeps his papers in precise order would notice. Mail opened and resealed badly, the flap still damp. Craig asked about my insurance policy twice in 1 week, with the casual tone of someone who had practiced sounding casual. Then I saw it. A Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting on the front porch, and Craig came walking up Abercorn Street with a man I had never seen before. Gray suit. Leather folder. The polished, practiced handshake of someone who sells things for a living. They stopped at the corner, talked for 10 minutes, and Craig kept gesturing back toward the house. My house. The house I had rebuilt with my own hands, from a pile of rotten wood and broken promises. I know a property assessor when I see one. I have worked with enough of them over 38 years. That night, Craig leaned in the kitchen doorway while I washed dishes and asked, very casually, "Hey, Dad, when's the last time you talked to that lawyer friend of yours? Mabel, right?" He said her name like he was testing it, turning it over in his mouth to see how it tasted. "Business," I said, without turning around. He smiled. I could feel it without looking. "Just curious," he said. "Just curious." The two most dangerous words in the English language when they come from someone who has already made up their mind. I knew then. I knew with the same certainty I know when a foundation is cracked, when a beam is compromised, when a structure that looks fine from the outside is rotting where you can't see it. My son and his wife were not waiting for me to hand over my life's work. They were planning to take it. I needed to make a phone call, but Jolene had made that nearly impossible. My cell phone had a way of disappearing. It would turn up later in places I knew I hadn't left it. The landline, I noticed, had certain calls that never seemed to ring through. She was good at this. I'll give her that. She ran her little operation with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this kind of thing before. So I went old school. I drove to Patterson's Hardware on East Broughton Street, the shop where my friend Earl had worked for 30 years, and I used the phone behind the counter. I called Mabel Thornton. Now, I need you to understand something about Mabel Thornton, because this woman is not just a lawyer. Mabel is what happens when you combine a razor blade with a filing cabinet and then give it a law degree. She is 64 years old, sharp as a chisel that has never once been used carelessly, and she has a memory that stores information the way a vault stores gold, permanently and with no intention of giving it back. But more important than any of that, Mabel was Maggie's best friend. They met in college, freshman year, roommates who became sisters in every way that mattered. Mabel was the maid of honor at our wedding. She was the first person at the hospital when Maggie had her stroke, and she was the last person I spoke to after the funeral, when everyone else had gone home and the house was so quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat. "I'll watch over him, Maggie," she had said at the graveside. Not to me, to the headstone. Like she was making a contract with someone who would absolutely hold her to it. When I called her from Earl's hardware store, she picked up on the second ring. "Harry," she said, and her voice had the sound of someone who had been waiting. "Harry, I was wondering when you'd call." "I need help, Mabel," I said. There was a pause. Then, quietly, "Maggie told me to watch over you. I've been waiting for this call." We met in secret, twice a week for 2 months. Her office on Drayton Street, always after hours, always through the back entrance. Mabel reviewed everything. The business, the property, the accounts, the insurance. And then she began building something. A trust. The Lily Dawson Trust. Every asset I owned, the house on Abercorn, Dawson built construction, the savings, all of it, redirected into a structure so airtight that not even the most aggressive lawyer could pry it open. Managed by Mabel herself as trustee until Lily turned 25. 2 documents were still unsigned. 2 signatures away from complete. We were close. So close I could taste it the way you taste rain before it falls. But I am not a careless man. A carpenter who doesn't plan for the worst is a carpenter who builds things that fall down. So I took one more precaution. I bought a prepaid phone. Nothing fancy. The kind you pick up at a gas station for $20. And I hid it in the one place in my house that Craig would never, ever go. My workshop. Specifically, inside the bottom drawer of my old workbench. The drawer with a dovetail lock. A joint so precise that only someone who understood woodworking at a structural level could open it. Craig had never set foot in that workshop. He said he hated the smell of sawdust. That smell was about to save my life. I stood there that night, alone in the workshop, the phone tucked safely inside the dovetail drawer, and I looked at the plans on the wall. Maggie's cottage. The little house by the marsh. 8 years of nights. Every nail accounted for. "I'm not done yet, Maggie," I said to the empty room. Not yet. 2 months of silent preparation. 2 unsigned documents. And then the rain came. And the rain brought something down those stairs that I should have seen coming. Because even a man who reads blueprints for a living can miss the one crack in the foundation that brings the whole thing down. There are nights in Savannah when the rain doesn't fall. It descends, like something heavy and deliberate being lowered onto the city by hands that don't particularly care what's underneath. The oak trees on Abercorn Street bend under the weight of it. The Spanish moss hangs limp and dripping like funeral curtains. The gutters overflow, and the streets turn into shallow rivers that carry leaves and trash, and the occasional frog past your front steps, like the city itself is trying to wash something away. That Tuesday night in October was one of those nights. I was in my armchair. The house was dark, except for the kitchen light. Craig and Jolene had gone upstairs an hour earlier. I could hear the rain hammering the roof, hammering the windows, hammering every surface of the house I had built, and beneath it, barely audible, a sound that shouldn't have been there. Water. Not rainwater. Moving water. Coming from below. The basement. My workshop. I knew the sound immediately. 38 years of construction teaches you to hear the difference between rain hitting a roof and water going somewhere it shouldn't. A pipe. Maybe the drainage line along the foundation wall. I'd been meaning to check it for weeks. I stood up, grabbed the railing at the top of the stairs. The stairs I had built myself 20 years ago from solid white oak. Every tread cut by my own hands. Every riser measured twice and cut once, the way my father taught me. I knew those stairs the way I knew my own name. One hand on the railing, one foot on the second step. I was thinking about the drainage line, about whether the problem was the main pipe or the secondary channel, about whether I had enough sealant in the workshop to patch it temporarily. Ordinary thoughts. The kind of thoughts that have no business being the last thoughts before your life changes. I felt them before I understood them. 2 hands. Flat. Firm. Pressed against the center of my back. Not a push the way you push open a door. A shove. Deliberate. Violent. The kind of force that comes from someone who has made a decision and doesn't want to give you time to make one. And then I was falling. I want you to understand what falling down a staircase is actually like, because the movies get it wrong. It's not graceful. It's not slow motion. It is a series of collisions. Your body hits the edge of one step, bounces, hits the next, and every single impact happens faster than your brain can process the one before it. You don't think. You don't react. You just break. My right wrist hit first. I heard it before I felt it. A sound like a green branch snapping, sharp and wet and wrong. Then my ribs, my right side slamming into the edge of the 4th step from the bottom with a crack that sent white light across my vision. Then my head, the back of my skull against the concrete floor of my own workshop, the floor I had poured myself in 1993, and the sound it made was the sound of something ending. I lay there, face down in the sawdust. The sawdust that smelled like 30 years of honest work, that now smelled like copper and salt and something I didn't want to name. Something warm was running down the side of my face, pooling in the hollow of my ear. My right arm was screaming. My ribs were having a conversation with my lungs that my lungs were losing. And above me, at the top of the stairs, a rectangle of light. Standing in that light was my son. I could see his silhouette, his shoulders, the shape of him that I had known since he was small enough to fit in the crook of my arm. He stood there for what felt like a very long time. And then he spoke. Maybe now he'll sign. His voice was flat, calm. The voice of a man who has crossed a line and doesn't intend to step back over it. And behind him, I heard her. Jolene. Not her words at first, just the sound of her. The soft rustle of her presence, the way you hear a snake before you see it. Then her voice, clear as a church bell and twice as cold. He's not going anywhere. Let him think about it down there. A laugh. Quiet. Almost gentle. The kind of laugh you might use at a dinner party when someone tells a mildly amusing anecdote. Then the light disappeared. The door closed, and the lock turned with a click that echoed through the workshop like the period at the end of a sentence that was never meant to be revised. Darkness. Complete. The kind of darkness that doesn't just surround you but fills you, pours into your ears and your mouth, and the spaces between your ribs where the pain is building its nest. The only sound was the rain above me, hammering the house, hammering the world, hammering the roof of the building I had spent my life constructing, indifferent to the man lying broken on its basement floor. I lay there in my own workshop. On the floor I had poured with my own hands, surrounded by the tools I had collected over 38 years, the workbenches I had built, the pegboard walls I had organized, with the precision of a man who believed that everything in life has a place where it belongs. The taste of blood and sawdust in my mouth. The smell of linseed oil and copper, mixing into something that shouldn't exist. My right arm useless. My ribs on fire. My vision narrowing like someone was slowly closing a door on the world. And in that darkness, in that pain, on that floor, I did something that I think would have made Maggie proud. I did not scream. I did not beg. I did not cry. I thought one single, clear, absolutely certain thought. Not today, son. Not today. Because somewhere in that darkness, 12 steps to my left, was a workbench. And inside that workbench was a dovetail drawer that only a carpenter's hands could open. And inside that drawer was everything my son didn't know about. If you've made it this far, do me one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. Let me tell you something about rock bottom. People describe it like it's a metaphor, like it's some abstract emotional place you visit when life gets hard. When you're a carpenter lying on a concrete floor you poured yourself, with sawdust sticking to the blood on your face. Rock bottom is not a metaphor. It is very literal. It is cold and flat, and it smells like linseed oil and copper and 38 years of your life, all mixed together into something that was never supposed to exist. But here is what my son never understood about his father. I did not build a company from a borrowed toolbox and a prayer by being the kind of man who stays down. My right arm was finished. I knew it without looking. The wrist was broken. The kind of break you feel in your teeth radiating up through the bone like a current. My ribs on the right side were having a conversation with my lungs that involved words like stop and don't and please. The back of my head was wet in a way that I refused to think about. And my vision was doing that thing, that terrible thing, where the edges of everything start going dark, like someone is slowly turning down the brightness on the world. But my left hand worked. My left hand, the hand that had held chisels and planes and levels for 38 years, the hand that had built more things than I could count, that hand was still mine. And it was going to do one more thing, 12 steps to the left. That's where the workbench was. I knew it the way I knew every inch of that workshop, the way a blind man knows his own house, because I had built this room. Every wall, every surface. I had placed every tool, every drawer, every shelf with the precision of a man who believed that knowing exactly where things are is the difference between order and chaos. I rolled onto my left side. The ribs screamed. I ignored them. I pulled myself forward with my left elbow, dragging my useless right arm alongside me. Like cargo, I couldn't afford to leave behind. Inch by inch. The concrete was cold against my chest. Sawdust scraped against my cheek. The darkness was so complete that I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. But I didn't need to see. My body knew this floor. 3 feet. 5 feet. 8 feet. My left hand found the leg of the workbench. Solid white oak. I had turned that leg on a lathe in 2004. I could feel the grain under my fingers, smooth and familiar, like shaking hands with an old friend. I pulled myself up against the bench. My ribs were done negotiating. They were now simply screaming in a language I was choosing not to translate. My left hand moved along the front of the bench, found the bottom drawer, found the dovetail joint. The dovetail lock. A joint so precise, so perfectly fitted, that it looks like a solid piece of wood to anyone who doesn't know what they're looking at. You can't pull it. You can't pry it. You have to press the left side in while sliding the right side down at exactly the same angle. A motion that requires understanding the geometry of wood at a level that takes years to develop. Craig never came down here. He hated the smell of sawdust. My fingers found the joint. 38 years of muscle memory. My left hand performed the motion the way a pianist plays a chord in the dark, without thought, without hesitation, from a place deeper than thinking. Press, slide. Click. The drawer opened. The phone was exactly where I had left it. Prepaid. Charged. $20. From a gas station. On Waters Avenue. The most important $20 I have ever spent. I got it out. I found the screen. I found the contact. One name. Mabel Thornton. The phone rang once. Twice. Harry. Her voice was immediate. Alert. The voice of a woman who keeps her phone on the nightstand because she made a promise. Basement, I said. My voice came out wrong. Thin. Broken. The voice of a man whose lungs are losing an argument with his ribs. Fell. Hurt. Mabel. Listen to me. A beat of silence. Then, very quietly, I'm listening, Harry. I'm recording this call. God bless that woman. Transfer everything, I said. The documents. Everything we prepared. The house. The business. The accounts. All of it. Lily's trust. Tonight. Whatever you can do tonight, do it. The rest when I wake up. A pause. Harry, say it clearly. For the record, I, Harold Dawson, I said, and I have no idea where I found the voice. Instruct my attorney, Mabel Thornton, to execute the transfer of all primary assets to the Lily Dawson Trust, effective immediately, pending my signature upon recovery. Craig Dawson and Jolene Dawson are to be removed as beneficiaries. Completely. Understood, Mabel said. Then, dropping the lawyer voice entirely, Harry, who did this to you? But the darkness had already decided it was done waiting. The brightness dial turned all the way down. The last thing I heard was Mabel's voice saying my name, and then nothing. Now, let me tell you about Russell Briggs. Because Russell Briggs is the reason I am telling you this story, instead of being the subject of one. Russell is 73 years old. Retired Savannah PD. 35 years on the force. The kind of man who sits on his front porch in the rain because he likes knowing what's happening on his street. His house is next to mine on Abercorn, close enough that he can see my workshop windows from his kitchen. That Tuesday night, Russell was on his porch. The rain was coming down in sheets, and through that rain he noticed something. The light in my workshop, the light that was always on when I was down there, went off. Not dimmed. Not flickered. Off. Suddenly, in the middle of the kind of evening when Harry Dawson was always in his workshop, 35 years of police work. Lights don't just go off like that, he said later. Not in Harry's shop. Not at that hour. He walked through the rain to my front door. It was unlocked. The house was dark. He called my name. No answer. He found the basement door, locked from the outside. He is a man who spent 35 years opening doors that people didn't want opened. This one took him about 4 seconds. He found me at the base of the workbench, unconscious, bleeding, phone still in my left hand, screen still glowing with Mabel's name. He called 911. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes, and by the time Craig and Jolene came rushing into that hospital room 2 hours later, faces arranged into expressions of concern, so practiced they could have toured community theaters across the southeast. There was already someone sitting in the corner chair, a leather briefcase on her knee, a cup of hospital coffee in her hand. The calm, unhurried expression of a woman who had made a promise to her best friend and had absolutely no intention of breaking it. Craig saw her, and the color left his face like paint stripped from a wall. I woke up to the sound of machines that had no particular opinion about whether I lived or died, and the face of a 73-year-old ex-cop who looked like he hadn't slept since the last time someone caused trouble on his street. "You gave me a scare, Harry Dawson," Russell said from the chair beside my bed. His voice had the weight of someone who had been sitting in that same spot for a long time, waiting for something he wasn't sure was going to happen. How did I get here? My throat felt lined with sandpaper. "I heard the nothing," he said simply. "House was too quiet on a night it shouldn't have been. Front door unlocked. Basement door locked from the outside." He let that detail sit between us like evidence placed carefully on a table. "Locked from the outside, Harry." I looked at him. This man who had spent 35 years reading crime scenes the way I read blueprints. He knew. He didn't need me to say it. "Thank you, Russell." He straightened up. Someone had to. The door opened about an hour later. Craig came in first. Jolene half a step behind, her signature position, close enough to influence, far enough to deny. Craig's face was arranged into devastation, so carefully constructed it could have won a regional theater award. "Dad, we had no idea. We thought you'd gone to bed." Jolene was the one who finally realized something was wrong. Jolene nodded. Wide eyes. Soft colors. She had changed into something that said concerned daughter-in-law the way a costume says character in a play. "We feel just terrible, Harry. Just sick about it." I thought about the words, "He's not going anywhere. Let him think about it down there." And I smiled. Not a warm smile. The smile of a man who has already made his phone call. "I'm sure you do," I said pleasantly. It was Craig who noticed her first. Mid-sentence, something about making sure this never happens again, when his eyes drifted to the corner. The chair. The leather briefcase. The cup of hospital coffee. Mabel Thornton, sitting with the calm patience of a woman who had been there for hours and intended to stay for as many more as necessary. Craig stopped talking. "Craig." "Jolene," Mabel said, polite as a scalpel. "Good of you to come." 3 seconds on Craig's face. Confusion became recognition. Became something that looked very much like a building in the fraction of a second, between the demolition charge firing and the walls starting to fall. Still standing. Already done. "Why is she here, Dad?" "Old friend. Heard I was hurt." At Harry's age, Mabel said without irony, "You want your friends close." "We should let him rest," Jolene said quietly. The sweetness was gone from her voice. What was underneath wasn't pretty. They left. Mabel produced a document from her briefcase and set it on my tray table with a pen. My ribs ached. My wrist throbbed. I picked up the pen with my left hand. "Hand me that," I said. 10 days in that hospital. Craig brought flowers 3 times. Each bouquet more expensive, which told me he was getting more nervous. Jolene wore softer colors each visit and asked nurses questions with the intensity of someone who had recently searched the internet for how to appear like a caring family member. Every visit, evidence of Mabel's presence was visible. Her briefcase, her coffee cup. I watched Craig clock it every time and say nothing. Russell came every day with his crossword puzzle. One afternoon he looked up and said, "I always thought there was something off about that daughter-in-law of yours." "Only the daughter-in-law?" I said. He gave me a look. I was being diplomatic. I laughed. "It cost me 2 ribs worth of pain. Absolutely worth it. I came home on a Thursday. Everything was done. Signed, witnessed, notarized, filed. The Lily Dawson Trust was fully funded and legally airtight. The house on Abercorn, the business, the accounts, all transferred into structures Craig couldn't touch, sell, leverage, or inherit. 38 years of work. Every truck, every contract, every dollar, redirected, clean, permanent. I settled into my armchair, accepted Jolene's tea with a grateful smile, listened to Craig talk for 20 minutes about improvements for the company. I nodded. I said that's interesting twice, and I thought, let them have Thursday. Let them have the comfortable lie where everything still feels like it might go their way, because Friday was coming. Mabel arrived at 9:55 Friday morning. I called Craig and Jolene into the sitting room. Craig looked at the briefcase, already open, documents stacked neatly, and something moved behind his eyes. Something that looked the way a load-bearing wall looks the second before it gives. Mabel explained in plain, thorough language that every asset had been transferred into the Lily Dawson Trust, effective the evening of my hospitalization. She explained the recorded call. She explained that Craig and Jolene had been removed as beneficiaries completely. She set the documents on the table, turned them to face my son and his wife, and folded her hands. Craig stared at those documents, the way a man stares at something when his brain is receiving information, but refusing to process it. Jolene's face went completely still. Every mask she owned, checked at once, and found to be useless. "You can't," Craig said. He was injured. He wasn't in his right mind. "I have the recorded call, time-stamped at 10:47 that evening," Mabel said. I anticipated a competency challenge. I prepared accordingly. Craig turned to me. "Why?" I looked at my son, 47 years old, sitting in the room where he'd opened Christmas presents as a child. My son, who had put his hands on my back at the top of a staircase and made a choice that could not be unmade. "Because I heard you, Craig," I said quietly. "Every word from the top of those stairs. And Maggie's best friend heard it too, on a recorded line." Jolene stood up so fast the chair scraped across the hardwood. For one moment she looked like she was going to say something that would have stripped the wallpaper. She looked at Mabel, looked at the documents, and walked out. The front door closed, with a sound that was very final. Craig didn't move for a long time. Then very quietly, "What about Lily?" That question, asked in that voice. The first honest thing my son had said in 2 years. "Lily is taken care of," I said. "Better than you know. Better than she knows yet." He put his face in his hands. I let him sit with it. Because there was one more thing coming. One more thing nobody in that room knew about. Something I had been building alone, every night, for 8 years, in the workshop they all thought was just a room full of sawdust and old tools. The last blueprint. Craig asked one honest question before he left my house that Friday. The only real question he had asked me in 2 years. "What about Lily?" And for the first time in a very long time, my answer wasn't about protecting something. It was about building something. They were out within 2 weeks. I won't dress it up. There were no screaming matches, no reconciliation in the driveway, no Hollywood ending where the violins swell and everyone learns something before the credits roll. Just boxes, a rented truck. Jolene directing the operation with the clipped efficiency of a general executing a retreat she had no intention of calling a defeat. Craig didn't say much during those 2 weeks. He moved through the house like a man walking through a building he knows is about to be condemned, touching things lightly, looking at rooms a second longer than necessary. Once, I caught him standing in the hallway, staring at the pencil marks on the doorframe where I used to measure his height every birthday. He didn't know I was watching. I didn't let him know. The morning they left, Lily was the last one out the door. She had been quiet all week, the kind of quiet that isn't empty but full, packed tight with things she didn't know how to say. She stood in the foyer with her backpack over one shoulder and looked at me with those eyes, her grandmother's eyes, and then she dropped the backpack and walked into me and held on. She held on the way someone holds on when they know that letting go means something changes forever. I felt her breathe in that shaky, broken way that means a person is trying very hard not to cry and losing the battle. "I didn't know, Grandpa," she said into my shoulder. "I want you to know. I didn't know what they were doing." "I know you didn't, Lily girl," I said. "That's one of the reasons you deserve everything." She pulled back, looked at me. "Can I still come to the workshop?" I looked at this child, this good, uncalculated, completely innocent child, who had been living in a house full of schemes, and had somehow managed to remain entirely unschemed. God puts people like Lily in the world to remind the rest of us what we were supposed to be before we got complicated. "Lily girl," I said, "that workshop has your name on it. Literally now." She almost smiled. "Almost. I still live on Abercorn Street. The Victorian still stands the way I built it. solid, patient, weathering the Savannah summers and the Savannah storms with the quiet dignity of something that was made to last. The oak trees still drop their moss on my front steps like gifts I never asked for. The porch still creaks in the same spot it's been creaking since 1993, and I have no intention of fixing it because some sounds are better than silence. Russell comes over every morning, 6:15, sharp. He brings his own coffee because he says mine tastes like it was brewed by someone who lost a bet. We sit on the porch. We don't talk much. We don't need to. There is a kind of friendship that exists between men who have seen the worst of what people can do and have decided, quietly, to keep showing up anyway. Russell is that kind of friend. God bless me with him next door. Mabel comes on Sundays. She brings peach cobbler from a bakery on Broughton Street, and she sits in the chair by the window in my living room. Maggie's chair. The chair where Maggie used to sit with her feet tucked underneath her, reading mystery novels and occasionally looking up to tell me some piece of trivia I didn't ask for and never forgot. Mabel sits there now, and sometimes she'll say something like, "Maggie would have handled this differently, you know." "How?" I'll ask. "Faster," she'll say. And we'll both laugh, and for a moment the house feels the way it used to. And Lily. Lily comes every weekend now. Friday evening, I hear her footsteps on the basement stairs, light and quick, and something in my chest loosens the same way it did the very first time. She puts on her safety glasses. She picks up a chisel, and we work, side by side, in the kind of silence that only exists between people who understand each other so completely that words would actually get in the way. She is getting good. She is getting very good. Her dovetail joints are tighter than mine were at twice her age. Her hands move with a certainty that comes from somewhere deeper than practice. Maggie's hands. I see it every time. Last month, I gave her something. A leather tube, the kind architects use for rolled blueprints. She looked at it, looked at me, and opened it carefully. The way you open something when you can tell by the weight of it that it matters. Inside was a complete set of plans. Every page, every measurement, every joint and beam and rafter. A cottage, a little house by the marsh, where the Savannah River spreads out, and the egrets stand in the shallow water at sunset. 2 rocking chairs on the porch. A view that goes on forever. 8 years of nights. Every line drawn in the workshop she now calls her own. There was a letter tucked inside. She read it standing there in the sawdust, and I watched her face do something I will carry with me for whatever time God sees fit to give me on this earth. Lily, I didn't build this house in time for your grandmother. That is the one regret I will take to my grave. But you have her hands. You have her eyes. And you have something I didn't have when I was your age. You have the plans. Build her the house, Lily girl. Your hands tell better stories than your mouth. They always have. Love. Grandpa. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just stood there with the plans in her hands, and the tears running down her face, and outside the workshop window the rain was falling softly on Abercorn Street. Not the violent rain of that October night. A gentle rain, the kind that makes things grow. Let me leave you with this. The people who try to bury you are counting on one thing, that you'll stay buried. They count on your exhaustion, your grief, your willingness to believe that family must mean well because they're family. They're counting on you not having a Mabel Thornton in your life, not having a Russell Briggs next door, not having a Lily who comes down to the workshop every Friday. So let me ask you something before you go. Do you know who's in your corner? Do you know who would pick up the phone and say, without hesitation, "I'm listening and I'm recording"? Because when the lights go out and the door locks and the cold floor is the only thing beneath you, that is the only call that matters. My name is Harold Dawson. I am 69 years old. I am a carpenter. I fell down a flight of stairs in my own house and I got back up, because that is what builders do. We get back up and we build something better. If this story touched your heart, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment telling me Who is the Mabel in your life? Who is the Russell? Who is the Lily? Because everybody deserves a workshop with their name on it. And everybody deserves a blueprint worth building.